It was a Tuesday. Mid-morning, the kind of light that comes in softly but doesn't warm you. I remember because I was still in my robe, folding his socks the way he liked. White toes paired with white toes. That ridiculous precision he'd inherited. From his father, he sat it over his shoulder, not even turning to look at me. "You're not the priority anymore, Mom." I didn't answer. Pressed my thumb against the seam of the last sock, so tightly I could feel the blood pulse in it. He was packing for a weekend at the lake with his wife, Jenna, the one who always smiled with her lips, but not her eyes. I'd offered to take care of the dog while they were gone. Didn't even acknowledge it. Said he was dropping him at a kennel. Said it'd be easier. He took the duffel bag and left it by the front door, like I was supposed to get up and carry it to the car. I didn't. I just stood there with that sock still pinched between my fingers. He left without a hug. Again. I sat down on the ottoman and watched the sun crawl up the wall. The quiet in the house wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, like silence with sharp teeth. I hadn't expected much from the day. I never did anymore. But I didn't expect that. I made tea. Jasmine, the scent always reminded me of when he was little. When he'd crawl into bed with me on stormy nights and ask if the house was strong enough to stay standing, I'd stroke his hair and say, "Always." I sipped it slowly. No appetite for food. The cup was warm in my hands, but I still felt cold. Later that afternoon, I opened my drawer, the one in the kitchen that held everything important. Spare keys, a pen that worked, my old notebook, and a letter I'd never mailed. I read it again. The one I wrote 2 years ago when Jenna first started coming around, and I felt the change. Not in him, in me. I felt myself getting smaller. Back then, I thought it was my imagination. Thought I was being sensitive or jealous, maybe. Not of her, but of the way he looked at her, like she was home now. He used to look at me like that. When his father died, he wouldn't leave my side. We held each other together in that church pew, shaking. I thought that meant something that couldn't be undone. Turns out, it could, slowly, like a rope unspooling. The last birthday he remembered was 3 years ago. And even then, he gave me a candle that smelled like gin. Said Jenna picked it out. I don't even drink. There was a moment that evening before the cake. Before he left early for some work emergency wear, I thought about saying it. Just asking, am I in the way? Am I too much? But I didn't. I smiled, lit the candle, blew it out with a wish I didn't believe in. I started making a list after that, not of grievances. I'm not that petty, just incidents. Moments where I felt it happening, the shift. So I could look at them later and know I wasn't imagining it. October 14th asked if I could visit for Thanksgiving. He said they had plans with Jenna's side. Again, November 6th, called to say hi. He said he'd call me back. Never did. December 24th, dropped off a gift on the porch. Didn't come in. I reread the list that Tuesday. My tea had gone cold then. I did something strange. I opened my email, searched his name, and just stared at it for a while. Nothing cruel. Nothing explosive. Just the absence. The slow drip of distance that hardens over time. I looked at myself in the reflection of the screen. My mouth looked tired. The sock was still on the ottoman. That night, I didn't make dinner. I poured a bowl of cereal and sat in the dark with the TV on mute. A commercial for cruise packages played over and over. The ocean looked so far away. I turned off the TV and whispered the words out loud. Not a priority. Not anymore. And I realized I'd been waiting. That's the worst part of it. I wasn't living. I was waiting for him to remember me. For a call, an apology. A weekend invitation. I was living my whole life on hold. And for what? I'd given him everything. I sold my jewelry to help with the down payment on their house. Babysat her niece when they wanted a date night. Sewed the hem on his wedding pants when the tailor messed up. I've been the background music to his new life. It's always there. Never noticed. I walked into the hallway. Looked at the coat hooks. My old raincoat hung there like a memory. Still smelled like cinnamon and old leaves. I slid it on, took the keys, walked out without a plan. The streetlight hummed. The world was still moving. Didn't care if I was priority or not. And I think, for the first time, neither did I. I didn't leave that night. But I let something go. The need to be needed. I wasn't always like this. Quiet, small, waiting on the edge of someone else's life. There was a time. I had color in my face and a voice people listened to. I had a small bookstore with lace curtains. In the window and a chipped bell above the door. Customers would ask for recommendations and actually take them. They'd leave with a book I loved, one I knew they needed, and come back later to tell me I was right. That used to fill me up more than food ever did. That was before the shop went under. Before my hands started aching from the cold. Before I became someone's mother and then just their shadow. I was 30 when I had him. Late, they called it. I didn't care. It was the only thing I wanted. The doctor handed him to me wrapped like a warm loaf of bread, and I cried so hard. I shook. Not because I was scared. It's because I couldn't believe I'd been trusted with something that precious. I remember the first time he said, "Mama." He was in the tub, and he kept patting the water and saying it over and over like it was a spell. I would have given up the world for that moment. Think I did. He was a soft-hearted boy. He used to cry when animals got hurt in movies. Had a little bear named Douglas he carried around until the stuffing started to leak from its seams. Sewed it up more times than I can count. When his father walked out one Thursday evening and never turned back, my son crawled into bed with me and didn't ask where he'd gone. Just laid there, breathing in time with mine. His little hand on my shoulder like a sandbag, keeping me from floating off. We were close. I built my life around that closeness. I didn't resent it. That's the part no one ever believes. I never wanted anything else. Not dates, not parties, not second chances. I was his mother. That was enough. When he was 16, he told me he wanted to be an architect. Said he wanted to make buildings that never cracked, never leaned, never collapsed. I told him that made perfect sense. I packed his lunches, stayed up late, helping him build models out of cardboard and glue. I remember once I accidentally broke the corner off a tiny roof and cried more than he did. He just laughed and said it was a design flaw anyway. He went to a school across the state. I helped him pack, slipped a note into his suitcase that said, "If it ever gets too hard, come home. I'll keep the porch light on." He came back for holidays, for laundry, for the soup I made when he had a cold. He still hugged me then, still called me Mama. He was taller, his voice deeper, but he still curled up on the couch like he used to, letting his knees poke over the armrest. I remember the first time he brought Jenna home. She was wearing heels that clicked like warning, signs on the floor, and a scarf that looked like it cost more than my rent. She smiled, but her eyes moved around the room like she was already redecorating it. She called me Maureen, not Mrs., not Mom, just Maureen. Like I was the receptionist at a doctor's office. He beamed the whole time. Looked at her like she hung. The stars. That night he asked me if I liked her. I said yes, because he looked so hopeful. But I felt something shift in me. Not jealousy, something else. A sense that my place was being repainted in lighter colors, as if I could be covered over. Still, I tried. Bought almond milk for her lactose thing. Set the table with the silverware she liked. Gave them space when they wanted to be alone. I kept making room, thinking if I made enough of it, I'd still belong somewhere. They got married in the spring. I wasn't part of the planning. I was told when to show up and where to sit. I wore navy blue and smiled so hard my jaw hurt. I gave them a check I couldn't really afford, but I wanted to show them love, even if I wasn't sure where I stood anymore. The first time they asked if I could dog sit, I said yes before he finished the sentence. It made me feel needed again. That's a dangerous feeling when it's the only one you have left. Over the years, the phone calls changed. Shorter, tighter. Like I was a checkbox being ticked. I'd ask how he was, and he'd say, "Good." I'd ask what he was working on, and he'd say, "Nothing much." Once, I said I missed him. There was silence. Then he said, Yeah, we've been really busy. I didn't say it again. It was Jenna who brought up the house. Said it was too big for me alone. Said maybe I should think about downsizing. I smiled and said I liked the space. What I didn't say was that every wall held a memory. That the creek in the upstairs hallway was where he used to race toy cars. That the backyard still had the spot where he buried Douglas when he was 12 after the bear finally fell apart for good. They stopped coming over altogether last winter. Said it was too far of a drive. Said they'd see me soon. Soon turned into never. I started noticing how quiet it got in the evenings. The only sounds were the refrigerator and my own breath. I filled the space with puzzles, books, anything I could do alone. But even books started to feel like echoes. Sometimes I'd walk into his old room. It still smelled like him faintly. Like dust and cedarwood, I never moved the trophies from the shelf. Never took down the drawing he did in 3rd grade of me. And him holding hands under a rainbow, spelled rainbow with a silent E. I don't know when it became normal. The silence. The waiting. The feeling like a guest in my own motherhood. But that Tuesday morning, with a sock in my hand and his words hanging in the air like a closing door, I think I finally heard it. What had been true for a long time. I wasn't a priority anymore. Maybe. I never really was. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't always come in one loud moment. Sometimes it arrives on tiptoe, dressed like practicality, spoken in a calm voice. It started with the paper. I was cleaning out the kitchen drawer. The same drawer that held stamps from 10 years ago and safety pins that had rusted shut. I wasn't looking for anything. Just organizing as people my age tend to do when we're trying to feel like we still have a little control. There was an envelope, one I didn't recognize. My name written neatly in the top left corner, but not in my handwriting. It had been opened, slid back into the drawer, like nothing. Like no one would notice. Inside was a photocopy of a power of attorney document. My name, his name, my signature. Except it wasn't my signature. I stared at it for a long time. My first thought wasn't anger, it was confusion. A stunned, dull kind of disbelief. My brain was flipping through pages trying to find the explanation that would make it all okay. I walked over to the light, held it up, traced the swoop of the M with my finger. Not mine. The kitchen clock ticked. It hadn't rained that day. But I felt soaked through. There had been little hints. I suppose. Jenna saying things like we're helping you stay on top of things. Or my son asking for my insurance login, saying it was just easier if he handled it. Once I got a call from a bank I didn't recognize, confirming a change of address. I thought it was a mistake. I believed them when they said they were helping, but there it was, the document. And at the bottom, my name written by a hand that wasn't mine. I didn't call him. I didn't march over or throw anything. I just sat at the kitchen table and looked out the window. The bird bath was empty again. The sparrows kept circling it, confused. That night, I pulled out my file box, the one where I kept old tax records and the deed to the house. I started going through everything with a kind of numb clarity, quiet, focused. I found the mail eyed, ignored. A few things looked off. One envelope said account terminated. Another said loan consolidated. My name was there, but I didn't remember any of it. I stacked them neatly, got out a pen, and wrote a list. I wrote everything down like I was an outsider investigating myself. Bank names, dates, policy numbers. I made a second list of all the times Jenna had visited alone. All the times they asked me to sign something real quick. Once I'd signed a paper through the car window, she'd smiled and said, "Just a routine form, Maureen. We're making things simpler." I thought it was for medical stuff. I didn't know. I was handing away pieces of myself. I went to bed with a cold feeling in my spine. I didn't sleep much. I kept seeing the signature in my mind, looping and wrong, like a forgery of my own life. The next morning, I called a lawyer. Not the family kind, the real kind. I didn't tell them the whole story. Just asked if they could look something over for me. He was kind, young, but patient. Said he'd seen things like this before, that it wasn't rare. People get scared, he said. They want control. Sometimes they convince themselves it's kindness. He didn't say theft. But I did, quietly. He looked me in the eye and said, "If this wasn't your signature, we have options." I thanked him, folded the paper, slipped it back in my purse. Like a secret I wasn't ready to show the world yet. The next few days I moved differently. I still answered when my son called. Still said I was fine when he asked. He never noticed the pause before my voice, never heard the crack just underneath it. He told me they were thinking of refinancing the house. Said something about rolling it into a better loan under their names. It's just made sense, he said. We'll take care of everything. Won't have to worry about a thing. I said I'd think about it. He said, no rush. But there was something in his tone, like he already assumed the answer. I hung up and sat still for a long time. Later that night, I opened the drawer again, took out the envelope, stared at the fake version of me at the bottom of that page. A stranger in my own script. I whispered it out loud. That's not me. It was the first time I'd said it. Not me. The betrayal wasn't loud. It didn't slam doors or raise its voice. It crept in, dressed as love, wore soft words and good intentions. Promised to make things easier, but only made me disappear. I thought about all the times I'd excused it. When they started collecting my mail, when they said I didn't need to come to meetings. When they installed a camera on my front porch just for safety. When Jenna changed the PIN on my debit card because I kept forgetting it, I wasn't forgetful. I was just trusting. They took my trust and made a checklist out of it. Folded me into paperwork until I wasn't a person anymore. It's just a dependent. Just a signature. It's just someone whose name came after the phrase, formerly known as owner. I could have screamed. But instead, I just sat in the dark and made another. List 1, I didn't show anyone. What they'd taken. What I still had. What? It's about to take back. The mind doesn't break like a plate. Folds quietly, slowly. Under pressure, it was never meant to hold. I didn't fall apart. I opened. Something, inside me, long hidden, started unfolding like a letter I hadn't dared to read. It happened one morning in the laundry room. I was loading whites into the machine, same as I always had. Folding my son's shirts, even though he hadn't worn them in years. Some habits cling to you like fog. My hand brushed a sock. The same sock from the Tuesday he told me I wasn't the priority anymore. Still folded on the corner of the shelf like it had waited for me to catch up. I sat down on the linoleum floor, pressed it to my chest, and breathed in. Nothing, no scent left. No warmth, just cotton and thread. It hit me suddenly and clearly how long I'd been waiting. How long I'd been living like a placeholder in my own home. How many days I'd swallowed silence like it was medicine. Bitter, necessary, dulling. I stood up and opened the drawer by the door, pulled out the emergency envelope. The one with my passport, my original birth certificate, the deed to the house in my name. And the little green notebook where I'd written all my passwords before I let them manage. Everything online, it was still there, untouched, unnoticed. I turned to the wall phone. It had been a long time since I used it for anything real. I called the lawyer again. His assistant answered, chipper and half asleep. I told her I wanted to come in. Not to ask questions, to act. I packed quietly. It's just a duffel bag. My clothes, a small photo album, and the green notebook. Nothing sentimental, not yet. I didn't want to feel anything more than I had to, in the back of the closet under my winter. Scarves. I found the checkbook they didn't know I kept. The one from the account he never asked about because he assumed I'd already merged everything into theirs. It wasn't much, but it was mine. When I walked out of the house, I didn't cry. I didn't look back. That surprised me. I thought there'd be some moment of heartbreak, some swelling music inside my chest, but there was just air, cool and clean. I drove to the motel just outside of town. It's the one by the gas station with the vending machines that only take exact change. It smelled like bleach and pine, air freshener, but it was quiet. And for the first time in years, no one knew where I was. The woman at the front desk asked if I needed help with my bag. Said no. She gave me a key without questions. That night, I sat on the edge of the bed with my notebook open, page by page. I started untangling the knots. Bank accounts, policies, phone numbers. I made lists, then made copies of the lists. I sorted things by date, by damage, by deception. I wasn't frantic. I wasn't angry. I was clear. Clarity is a quiet sort of power. It doesn't roar, settles. The next morning, I met with a lawyer again. He wore a dark gray suit and greeted me like I was someone real, not an old woman whose name had been used like a footnote. He handed me a folder with paperwork, revocation documents, statements of intent, a list of next steps. I read each page with both hands flat on the table. My fingers didn't shake. He said I had a case, a strong one. He said the documents they'd filed would unravel, that with proof, with time, I could pull myself back out of the paperwork they'd buried me in. It wouldn't be loud, but it would be permanent. He told me I didn't have to confront them, that everything could go through him. I nodded. It felt like turning off a switch, not just to their access, to their noise, their needs, their version of me. I stayed in that motel room for 3 more days, woke early, ate crackers and tea, walked twice around the block each morning, watched the shadows crawl across the floor. In the afternoon, there was peace in the slowness. I didn't miss them. That was the strangest part. I thought I would. Thought I'd ache for a voice message or a text or the sound of the front door opening. But I didn't want any of it. Not anymore. Not if it meant shrinking again. One night, I stood at the window and looked out at the dark parking lot. Couple argued quietly by their car. A teenager smoked behind the ice machine. The world kept moving. I picked up my notebook and wrote 6 words on a clean page. I am not waiting anymore. Then I tore it out and folded it into my wallet like a passport. Later that week, called the bank, changed my passwords, transferred what little I had left. I closed the shared account they'd opened in my name without asking. I called the insurance company, explained. They listened. I think they knew the story before I even told it. I didn't raise my voice. I just said, that's not me. This is, and I gave them my name again, my real one, not the version they'd written on forms without permission. That night, back at the motel, I opened the photo album. It was a picture of him, age 4, running through the sprinkler in our old backyard. Smile wild. Sun in his hair. I let myself cry just once. Not for him. For her. The version of me in that picture, just out of frame. Holding a towel and laughing. She had no idea how quiet it would get. But she also didn't know that one day I'd speak again. I didn't write a note. I didn't owe them that. Instead, I left the house exactly as it was. Towels folded, dishes clean, still warm from the dryer. Let them think I'd gone to the store, or maybe to a doctor's appointment. Let them believe I'd come back. But I wasn't coming back. To that version of myself, not to the place where I'd been carefully erased. I rented a mailbox under a different name, just a variation my mother's maiden name slipped in between the first and last. It felt like folding back into my own skin. The woman I had been. Before I was someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's afterthought. Then I went to the county records office. I stood in line behind a man arguing about a permit. Behind a woman explaining she'd changed her name after marriage. The clerk didn't look up when I stepped forward. She just asked for my documents. I slid them through the window one by one. Driver's license, deed copy, revocation of power of attorney. I said I needed to make changes. Quietly, permanently. She stamped them all. I watched the ink dry. I never changed the locks on the house. That wasn't the point. I didn't need to keep them out. I just needed to no longer be inside. The house went on the market 2 weeks later. I hired a lawyer to list it. He handled everything. Told me I didn't need to meet in person. Didn't need to justify. Just needed to sign. This time I made sure my signature was mine. I signed with a black pen, slowly, like a ceremony. I left the key under the third step, where the wood creaked and warped, so the buyers would find it during inspection. That was fine. I didn't want to walk through it again. I didn't want a last look. I already knew what was there, every room filled with ghosts of who I used to be. The money from the sale wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to live without asking. Enough to make choices that were only mine. I opened a new account under my new name. I didn't put anyone else on it. The motel clerk smiled when I came back that evening, holding a grocery bag of my things. She said I looked lighter. I told her I was just tired. But maybe it was both. I stayed 2 more weeks while I found a small cottage 3 towns over. The roof sagged a little, the fence was missing slats, the kitchen tiles were yellowed. I loved it instantly. It didn't have to be perfect. It just had to be mine. I paid the deposit in person. The landlord asked if I needed help moving. Said no. I had 2 suitcases and a folder of papers. It's all I needed to start over. That night in the empty cottage, I sat on the floor and lit a candle. Not for the past, not for him, for myself. A way to mark the return. It's like a lighthouse calling a ship back home. The silence here is different. Not heavy, not waiting. It has room in it, space to grow. I unpacked my green notebook first, set it on the counter beside the sink, stand my books. Just the ones I'd kept, a few favorites with pages soft from being read so many times. I stacked them beside the bed. No shelf yet. But that didn't matter. I went to the store and bought things I liked. Real butter, apricot jam. Black tea. Leaves instead of bags. Small radio. The first morning I opened the windows and let the air in. It smelled like dirt and wildflowers. There's no sound except a bird calling once. Then again, I made toast and didn't rush. Ate it with a fork, like it mattered. I began writing again. Just lists at first. But I saw at the window what time the mail arrived. The names of wild plants I wanted to learn. But it felt like opening a door that had been locked for years. It's my voice coming back to me in pieces. I bought a used phone, not registered in my name, no apps, no photos. It's just numbers I chose to put in. I didn't add his. I wasn't hiding. I was reclaiming. There's a difference. It didn't take long before they noticed. First, it was a text from him. It's just a question. Mark. Then another. Where are you? Then, Mom, seriously, what's going on? I didn't answer. The lawyer called and said my son had tried to access the house records. Said he was confused, panicked, that the documents had caught him off guard. I told the lawyer he could answer on my behalf. Tell him it was all legal, that I'd simply exercised my rights, that I didn't need to explain. The next voicemail was, "Longer, Mom. Come on. What is this? We're just trying to help. Why would you go behind our backs like this?" I listened to it once, then deleted it. There was no apology, just confusion, as if they couldn't understand how I'd done it without permission. But that's the thing. I didn't need theirs. I spent that evening cleaning out the kitchen cupboards, found a single teacup with a crack in the handle and decided to keep it. It wasn't perfect, but it held warmth just the same. Before bed, I stood at the window and looked out over the empty yard. Nothing planted, nothing blooming. Just earth good, I thought. Let it start from scratch. The messages came in bursts, 2 in one afternoon. Then 6 in a single hour. My old phone still worked if I plugged it in, though I kept it powered off most of the time. But every few days, I'd turn it on just long enough to see the notifications stack up like bricks in a wall I wasn't going to climb over. The first few were from him. "Hi, son. Hey, we need to talk. You can't just disappear like this. I don't understand what you're doing." Then longer ones. Sentences that tried to soften. "Mom, please. If you were upset, you could have just told us. This isn't the way to handle it. We were helping you." That word again? helping as if forging my signature was kindness, as if shifting the deed out of my name without my knowledge was some tender mercy, as if they could take what was mine, call it care, and still expect me to thank them. I didn't respond. A week passed. The voicemails turned frantic. Jenna's voice showed up in one. Clipped, "Hi. You're blowing this out of proportion. We're trying to manage things responsibly. You said yourself you were tired. You asked for help. I never asked to be erased. I asked for company. I asked for time. Asked to still matter." They answered with documents. Another voicemail. This time, angry. "My son again." His voice sharper. "You didn't have to go nuclear. We're your family. Why would you sell the house? Why didn't you tell us?" I sat on the porch of my little cottage, a chipped mug of tea in my hands, and let the anger pass through me like wind. It didn't stick anymore. Just passed. The next message came from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. "Hey, Maureen, I don't want to get in the middle of anything, but your son reached out. Said he's worried. Said you're not answering. You okay?" I didn't reply. Not because I wasn't okay, but because I didn't owe anyone my okay anymore. Not him. Not the ones who were silent when I was shrinking. Not the people who saw me being pushed to the margins and said nothing. I left the phone on silent for 3 days after that. When I turned it back on, there was a voicemail that lasted over 2 minutes. Just him, my son, rambling, saying he didn't understand how things got like this, saying Jenna was crying, saying he'd already told his boss that things were unstable at home, and he needed a few days off. He didn't say he was sorry. He just said he was overwhelmed. It's like that was something I had caused by saying no. I listened to it twice, not for the apology that never came, but to remind myself what it sounded like, the unraveling of control. When someone has built their comfort on your compliance, your quiet disappearance feels like betrayal. But it wasn't. It was reclamation. I checked my email the next morning. There were 2 messages flagged urgent. One from the financial advisor he'd used to reallocate my accounts. Apparently there'd been confusion. Apparently I had taken steps they weren't informed of. Could we schedule a conversation? I deleted. It got another email from his wife. Just 2 lines. "We're hurt, but mostly confused." That word again. Confused. As if my boundaries were written in a foreign language. As if silence wasn't its own form of speech. They didn't want clarity. They wanted access, and they'd lost it. Later that week, the lawyer called me. Said they'd tried to contest the sale of the house. Tried to argue I wasn't in my right mind. That I'd been manipulated by someone. That I couldn't have done it alone. He told me not to worry. It wouldn't hold up, but I smiled when he said it. Couldn't have done it alone. That was the story. They'd told themselves that I was soft, easily led. A burden wrapped in lace and worry. They didn't know I had been planning my departure long before. I packed a bag. They didn't know I'd practiced my signature late at night, just to remember what it felt like to own something again. They didn't know that every time they brushed off my questions, they were making it easier for me to walk away. They thought they'd built a cage out of good intentions. They forgot. I still had a key. By the end of the month, the cottage was fully mine. I'd found a rhythm. Morning walks, late afternoon tea, evenings with a book or a small local paper. The world didn't mourn my disappearance. It made space for it. And I began to notice small kindnesses. A neighbor who brought me fresh bread. A child who waved from her porch every afternoon. A clerk who remembered my name without asking twice. No. One here knew the version of me that begged to be remembered. No. One here had seen me fading, and I liked it that way. Back on the old phone, the voicemails slowed, fewer each week. The final one was short. Just his voice, tired. "If you're really not coming back, I hope you're okay. Not, I'm sorry. Not I understand. Just, I guessed it was the truest thing he'd ever said. He guessed, but he never really saw. There's a kind of silence here that doesn't ache. It's the kind that lets you hear your own breath. The way the kettle sings softly just before it boils. The rustle of leaves outside the bedroom window before the sun has fully risen. No doors slamming, no footsteps overhead. No voices demanding to know why you're being so sensitive again. Just stillness, not loneliness. There's a difference. I know that now. The cottage has started to take on the shape of me. The curtains I chose, pale blue, light enough to let the morning in, but thick enough to keep the heat out. A teacup with a rosebud at the bottom, so each sip ends in something blooming. The second-hand armchair from the shop down the road. Worn but solid. It's comfortable in the way only something old and useful can be. I don't rush anymore. I do one thing at a time. Sometimes that one thing is just sitting with my hands open in my lap, letting the day pass through me. The neighbors are kind in the way that matters. They don't ask questions they wouldn't want to answer themselves. They wave, they smile. One of them, a girl named Millie, maybe 11, brings me wildflowers every Thursday. I press them in a book I keep by the window. No names written down. Just colors, purples, whites. A little orange one she called Flame-Eye. She knocked on my door once with a cookie wrapped in a napkin. Said her mom told her to leave it on the porch, but she wanted to hand it to me herself. I opened the door and took it from her palm gently. It's like it was a fragile thing. She asked if I was someone's grandma. I said, not anymore. She blinked, then smiled. That's okay, she said. You can be mine if you want. I didn't cry. I just bent down and said, we'll see. She hasn't missed a Thursday since. Sometimes I walk down to the post office, even if I don't have anything to send. I like the rhythm of it, the slow shuffle of small-town life. The way the man behind the counter calls me Miss M, even though I told him Maureen. I don't correct him. It makes me feel like someone who's lived here forever. They don't know my old story. They don't know what I left or who I used to be. They only know me as I am now. The woman who buys one stamp at a time, who always says thank you, who once handed back a dropped $5 bill without a second thought. I like who I am here. I eat what I want, nothing expensive. Toast with butter, sliced tomatoes with sea salt, apples cut into quarters. Food that makes sense? It's food I make only for me. I keep the little green notebook by the kettle. I don't write passwords in it anymore. It's just thoughts, lists, bits of memory. On one page, I wrote, today I felt full and didn't owe that feeling to anyone. Another day, I wrote, no one looked at me today like I'd forgotten something. No one looked through me. Some mornings, I sit in the armchair with the sunlight pouring in and I whisper aloud to the empty room, just to hear my voice again. It still sounds like me, not the hushed, agreeable tone I used for years. Not the careful phrasing. Not the voice that waited for permission. Just mine. I'd begun saying good night to myself out loud. It feels silly, but also sacred. As if I am finally being mothered. And it is by the person who should have done it all along. I used to think starting over would feel like loss. It doesn't. It feels like room. It's like clean air in a place that had been full of smoke for so long. I didn't even realize I was choking. I don't miss the house. Or the things I left behind. I miss the illusion I clung to that they loved me as I was. That love would always mean a seat at their table. That blood was the strongest bond. It wasn't. Love doesn't forge your name onto documents. Love doesn't call you a burden when it thinks you're out of earshot. Love doesn't hand you a cup of tea with one hand and take your autonomy with the other. There is peace in knowing that now. Peace without apology. No one's asked me to come back. Not really. Not in a way that costs them anything. They want the version of me that agreed, that smiled politely while being slowly erased. That made it easy. That version is gone. I remember her gently, the way you remember an old coat that kept you warm once but doesn't fit anymore. And this small, quiet life I've built, it fits. I don't wake up dreading the day anymore. I wake up wondering how many birds I'll see at the feeder. Whether the toast will brown just right. If Millie will bring another strange flower with a name she made up on the spot. The other day, I caught my reflection in the cottage window, my hair a little wild, my eyes soft at the edges. I looked like someone who had finally stopped waiting, and I smiled. It had been 63 days since I left. I knew because I marked each one with a dot in the corner of my notebook. Not to keep track of what I'd escaped, but to remind myself of what I'd sustained. 63 days of peace. No explanations. No bargaining. No being made to feel like something ornamental and optional. The letter came on a Monday, folded once, slid into a plain envelope, my name in his handwriting on the front. No return address. Just that familiar loop in the M that had once looked like love and now just looked like a pattern I'd finally stepped out of. I held it for a while before opening it. The envelope was thinner than I expected. I don't know what I thought it would contain. Maybe a longer version of the messages I'd ignored. Maybe another excuse dressed up like carrot inside. Just one page. Half a page, really. He said he was sorry I felt the need to go. That he wished. Said something earlier. That he didn't understand why. It's to involve lawyers. That Jenna, struggling to sleep. That the house didn't feel the same without me. He hoped I was safe. That was it. No mention of the forged signature. No acknowledgement of what they took. Only what I'd taken away. My presence. I read it once. I didn't fold it back. I placed it under the sugar bowl and let it sit there like a placeholder for the apology that hadn't arrived. 3 days later, he showed up. I was sitting on the front step, a cup of tea cooling between my hands, the sunlight gentle on my knees. I heard the crunch of tires on gravel and looked up, already knowing. His car looked the same, a little cleaner than it used to be. He stepped out slowly, as if unsure how to stand in a world where I'd chosen distance. He said my name, not Mom, not Mama, just Maureen. That told me everything. I nodded, didn't invite him to sit, didn't speak first. He looked thinner, or maybe just less certain. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his eyes skimming the cottage behind me like he couldn't quite believe. I lived somewhere he hadn't picked out. He said he didn't come to fight. I said I didn't either. He said he missed me. I asked which part. He didn't answer. He looked down, picked up a pebble with his toe, and said he didn't realize how far things had gone. That he thought he was helping. That Jenna was the one who handled most of the forms. That it all got out of hand. That phrase, like it was something loose on the kitchen counter. A spilled glass, an overcooked roast. I looked at him for a long time. Long enough that I think he started to hope I'd cry. That I'd soften. I didn't. I said, "You didn't just take control. You made me disappear." His jaw moved like he was chewing words. Then he said he hadn't meant to hurt me. But meaning isn't the same as impact. I told him I knew. That he'd meant for me to be comfortable, quiet, looked after. That he'd thought somewhere along the way that I was something to be managed, not someone to be listened to. He said he wished I'd told him sooner, that I felt erased. I told him I had, in 100 small ways. The notes, the offers, the questions left unanswered. I told him I noticed when he stopped looking me in the eye. When his wife called me Maureen like I was someone hired for the evening. He didn't deny it. He said he thought I'd understand. That I'd see they were trying to build a life and they needed space. I said, I gave you space. You used it too. Make me small. There was a long silence then. Just wind in the leaves. A bird calling once and then going quiet. He asked if I'd ever come back. I said, not to where I wasn't wanted. He said he wanted me. I asked, or you want the version of me that never said no? He didn't answer. He looked out at the field beside. The cottage, the tall grasses moving like breath. Then he said he should go. I nodded. He hesitated at the car door, said, I really do hope you're okay. I said, I am Dot. It was the truth. He drove away without looking back. The dust settled. The stillness returned. I walked inside, placed the teacup in the sink, and took the letter out from under the sugar bowl. I folded it, not carefully, and slid it into the back of the green notebook. Not to remember his words. To remember my silence. He came looking for the mother who would fold, who would smooth things over like a wrinkled sheet, who would smile and say, "It's fine, doesn't matter." But she was gone. I didn't burn the letter. I didn't rip it. I didn't need to. The power wasn't in what he wrote. It was in what I refused to give back. I've stopped marking the days, not because they don't matter, but because I no longer need proof of my survival. I feel it in the way I move through the world now, steady, unrushed. No one watching. No one waiting for me to do something different, quieter, smaller. Just me in my own skin. In my own space. I planted something last week. Lavender, in the little patch by the front steps. The soil here is thick, stubborn, but I dug with my bare hands anyway. It felt good to be that close to the earth, to be reminded that things can grow again, even after they've been choked by years of shade. The scent clung to me for hours. When I caught it on my sleeve later that night, I smiled without thinking. I never realized how much of my life had been lived trying not to be a problem, not to inconvenience, not to take up too much room, not to ask for more than what was gently handed down like scraps. I thought being needed meant I mattered. I thought being silent meant I was kind. I thought love was something you earned by staying grateful, no matter how little you were given. Now I think love, the real kind, is what makes you more of yourself, not less. I have that now. Not from them. From me, I still dream about the old house sometimes. Not in the way I expected. I don't walk its hallways in sadness. I don't long for the creak of its stairs or the echo of his voice from upstairs. When I dream of it, it's empty, sunlight on bare floors, no furniture, just space. I walk through it like someone who once lived there but doesn't anymore. I don't wake up crying. I wake up knowing I left at the right time. I found a secondhand store in the next town over. The woman who runs it, Carol, reminds me of my sister, if my sister had ever listened. She calls everyone hun and wears bracelets that clink like wind chimes. She asked me once what brought me here. I just said I needed a change. She nodded and said, "Well, you've got a good stillness about you." A good stillness, not silence, not erasure, stillness, like something rooted, something finished with running. She gave me a part-time job keeping the books for the shop. I sit in the back with a pencil and a mug of strong coffee and balance columns of numbers while listening to old music on the radio. She doesn't ask about my past, just says, "You're a natural." Every Friday, she lets me take home one item from the donation bin. Last week, it was a scarf, soft and gray. The week before, a novel I'd loved 20 years ago and forgotten. I tucked it under my pillow and read the first chapter before bed, smiling at the way the sentences still knew me. Millie, the neighbor girl, brought me a paper crown she made from magazine clippings. Said everyone needs something royal. I keep it on the kitchen table. When the light hits it just right, the glue sparkles. Sometimes I write letters I don't send. To my son, to Jenna, to the woman I used to be. I write them to let the weight pass through me, then I fold them into the back of my notebook. I don't need them read. It's just released. There's a power in keeping something for yourself, not out of secrecy, but out of dignity. I don't hate them. That's important. People assume you have to hate someone to walk away. You don't. Sometimes. You walk away because love stopped being love and turned into something else. Obligation, manipulation, routine. Sometimes you walk away to remember your own name. Sometimes you walk away not out of anger, but because no one else will open the door for you, so you do it yourself. I don't know if he thinks about me now. If he still checks the mailbox for a letter I'll never send. He tells people I'm stubborn or dramatic or ungrateful. Let them. I used to be so afraid of what people would think. Now I know the only opinion that matters is the one I face in the mirror each morning, and she's proud of me, for surviving, for choosing peace over proximity, for choosing to be whole instead of held. The lavender has started to bloom, just a little. I touch it each morning. Lean in to breathe deep. I think about how many years I spent cutting pieces off myself just to fit inside someone else's idea of family. Now, I take up all the space I need. There's no celebration for that. No parade, no applause, just the sound of my own voice when I say goodnight to myself, the softness of my sheets, the gentle thrum of my heart still choosing to stay. I still wear the same name, but now when I say it out loud, I hear it clearly. I hear every syllable as a return. This time, I decide who gets to call me anything else.